Who would have thought that a millionaire could spend his birthday completely alone? Ethan Ward sat in a luxurious restaurant with a cake and a single candle, while no one showed up, not his so-called friends, not his business partners. But just as he was about to blow out the flame in silence, a poor waitress stopped, looked him in the eyes, and said one sentence that would change everything. "You don't look alone to me." What followed wasn't just a birthday surprise. It was the beginning of something real, something he had been missing all his life. Before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone. Ethan Ward turned 36 that evening, though it hardly felt like a celebration. The restaurant's private hall was wrapped in golden light, chandeliers glittering above the velvet booths. Yet the table reserved for his birthday looked strangely empty. A small cake with white frosting and a single candle sat in the center, ordered not by a friend or assistant but by himself. For years he had hosted parties that made the newspapers, soirees where champagne never stopped flowing and laughter filled every corner. Tonight, there was only silence. He had told himself he wanted it quiet this year, that perhaps solitude was preferable to the parade of insincere smiles. But the truth hurt in a different way. His phone remained stubbornly dark. No calls, no messages. Not even from those who owed him everything. Partners, colleagues, the people who once crowded around him for favors. All gone when the music stopped. He ran his hands slowly along the edge of the polished mahogany table, listening to the echo of his own breath in the cavernous space. Outside the hall, laughter from other guests occasionally slipped through the heavy doors. Families clinked glasses, friends leaned close in celebration, couples toasted anniversaries. He could hear life everywhere but at his own table. A sharp irony. The man who could buy the entire street with a signature couldn't summon a single genuine companion to his birthday. The waiter had already come twice, politely asking if he wanted to start the meal. Ethan had waved him off with a curt nod. He wasn't hungry. He stared at the candle, its flame trembling slightly each time the air moved. For a moment, he thought about blowing it out. Not to make a wish, but to end the absurdity of the scene. That was when a small accident broke the silence. A clatter of glass against the floor, followed by the soft gasp of a young woman. Ethan turned his head sharply and saw her kneeling, picking up shards of crystal near his table. Her hair was pulled into a loose ponytail, strands escaping around her face. The uniform she wore was simple. White shirt, black apron, sleeves rolled too many times from constant work. She looked tired, the kind of tired that seeps into the bones. Yet her eyes carried a brightness that startled him. She muttered an apology, cheeks coloring as she collected the pieces. Ethan surprised himself by standing to help. He bent down, picked up one of the larger fragments, and placed it carefully on the tray she was holding. Their eyes met briefly, his pale blue and heavy with years of guarded distance, hers, hazel and warm in a way he had nearly forgotten existed. "You don't have to," she said quickly, almost flustered. "It was my mistake." "Maybe," he answered, his voice lower than he expected. "But I've made a few of those myself." A faint smile crossed her lips, though she seemed unsure whether to stay or go. She finished gathering the glass, set the tray aside, and wiped her hands nervously against her apron. That was when she noticed the small cake on his table, its candle still burning patiently. Her brow furrowed, and for a second he felt exposed, as though she had glimpsed something private. "It's your birthday?" she asked softly. Ethan hesitated, then gave a short nod. Apparently so. No one else would have dared to speak to him that way. No one would have asked the question with such unvarnished curiosity, without calculation or pretense. She lingered, her gaze shifting between him and the candle. Then she leaned just slightly closer and said, almost like a secret, "You don't look alone to me." The words landed with a weight far heavier than he could have imagined. They pierced through the polished armor he wore every day, the walls he had built so high. He stared at her, trying to understand why a stranger's simple sentence felt more like a gift than all the extravagant presents he had received in the past decade. His throat tightened, his hand curled into a fist against the tablecloth. For the first time that evening, he wasn't thinking about the emptiness of the room. He was thinking about her. "Sit," he heard himself say, almost surprising his own ears. "Just for a moment." She blinked, uncertain. "I'm working. I shouldn't." "Just for a moment," he repeated, his voice firmer, though it held no command, only plea. She hesitated, then slowly slid into the chair across from him. The candle flickered between them, its light catching the freckles across her nose. For a heartbeat, the lonely silence of the hall shifted. It no longer felt like a void. He studied her, this waitress who had dared to look at him not as a millionaire, not as a powerful name printed in magazines, but as a man. She didn't seem intimidated, only curious, almost protective in the way her eyes softened when she looked at him. "What made you say that?" he asked finally. Her lips curved in the smallest smile. "Because it's true. People who are really alone, they look different. I've seen it. But you," she tilted her head, "you just look like someone waiting for the right person to notice." Ethan leaned back in his chair, letting her words sink deep. He had spent so long believing no one could see past his title or his money. Yet here she was, speaking as if she had known him all along. And for the first time in years, Ethan Ward felt something stir inside him. A fragile warmth, a spark of connection, born not of contracts or obligations, but of one unguarded moment. She glanced at the door to the service corridor, then back at the candle between them, as if weighing a small rebellion against the rules of her shift. "1 minute," she murmured, placing the clean water glass in front of him with both hands, like a promise she could keep. "I'm Lena." "Ethan," he said, and for once he didn't add a last name as armor. The flame threw a thin gold ribbon across her cheek. Up close she looked younger than he first thought and older at the same time. Young in the clarity of her gaze, older in the way she watched for pain as if she knew where it lived. She folded her hands on the table's edge, careful not to leave fingerprints on the polished wood. He noticed the faint imprint of bandage tape on her fingers. Someone who washed dishes when the dishwasher broke, who tied aprons and lifted trays and carried other people's celebrations without being invited to sit. "What would you have wished for?" she asked. "If you'd blown it out without me seeing you." He let out a quiet breath that almost counted as a laugh. "For the candle to burn itself out, so I didn't have to pretend." "Try again," she said softly, not teasing. "Pretending is already your job tonight." He surprised himself by answering, "For one honest conversation." "Then don't blow it out yet," she whispered, leaning in. "Make it work." For a long, unlikely minute, they did nothing but sit with the nearness of another human being. Somewhere in the main hall, a saxophone slipped into a standard. Somewhere a child insisted on a dessert first. Somewhere the hostess laughed. All the life of the building threaded around their quiet like a river around a rock, and the rock was starting, impossibly, to feel warm. He cleared his throat. "How did you know I wasn't?" He searched for the right word and chose the wrong one on purpose. "Dangerous." "You helped me pick up the glass," she said. "People who use other people don't bend down." He held that observation as if it were fragile crystal itself. "You notice things." Her smile was quick, grateful that he noticed she noticed. "Occupational hazard. Also, I study in the mornings. 2nd year. Nursing." "Nursing," he repeated. That explains the hands. She looked at her fingers, slightly reddened where hot trays had caught her, and gave a small shrug. And the circles under my eyes. He almost told her about the 4 private hospitals his company had quietly funded across the city, the wings named after people who could no longer say thank you. But this moment felt allergic to announcements, so he said instead, "Do you get an off day?" "Wednesdays," she said. "I do laundry and forget I'm 25. Then, because she didn't want him to feel like he was taking and not giving, she added, "My dad used to tell me birthdays are for taking inventory. What you have that no one can take. He died 3 summers ago. I still make lists on my birthday. Not of gifts, of people." "Who makes the list now?" he asked. She looked at him as if he were a difficult but solvable equation. "You don't have to be on anyone's list to make one of your own." He felt the sentence land in some unlit room inside him and turn on a light. "Blow it out," she said suddenly, the softness in her voice edged with ceremony. "But don't wish to disappear. Wishing is the only honest thing left on a birthday." His lips curved before his mouth could stop them. He leaned toward the wavering flame and, for the first time since he told himself he wanted quiet, he wanted something else. He wanted this presence that had the audacity to see him. He closed his eyes, thought of nothing eloquent, and wished for company that didn't keep score. Then he blew. A small curl of smoke wrote a secret in the air between them. She clapped once, lightly, a joke so gentle it didn't even leave fingerprints on the evening. "Congratulations. You survived your own party." He reached for the knife and hesitated. "You'll get in trouble if I offer you a slice?" "I'll get in trouble if I eat the whole thing," she said solemnly. "A slice is diplomacy." He cut a careful wedge and pushed the plate toward her. She didn't take the first bite. She waited, watching him with an attention he wasn't used to. He realized she wouldn't let him use his hospitality as a shield. He lifted the fork and tasted vanilla and sugar and the faint bitterness of being seen. She followed, closing her eyes for a second that felt longer. People who work with hunger know how to honor sweetness. "What made them not come?" she asked after a while, not prying, simply drawing a circle where he could step if he wanted. "I told them I wanted something small," he said. "I think they heard expendable. Or maybe I finally stopped paying for their calendars." He rolled the fork between his fingers. "The truth is, I trained them. I threw parties where you could mistake noise for affection. And now you're correcting the mistake," she said, "or repeating it in a more expensive room." "You invited me," she said gently. "That's the correction." He set the fork down. The gold of the candle's afterimage still warmed her face. "Stay 5 more minutes," he said. "Tell me something that isn't about me." She could have told him about bills and bus transfers and the neighbor who borrowed sugar like it were a love language. She could have told him about the letter from the nursing program congratulating her on a scholarship short by precisely the amount she didn't have. But she watched him, measured his breath, and chose a story that wouldn't turn this into a transaction. "When my dad was in hospice," she said, "there was a man 2 rooms down who never had visitors. The nurses still changed his sheets with the same care, still talked to him about the weather. One afternoon I walked past and heard him laugh. Not because of a joke, because someone said his name like it belonged to him. I decided that day I wanted a job where I would say people's names like that." "What was his?" Ethan asked, already knowing she would remember. "Arthur," she said. "He died 2 days later. But for an hour, he was Arthur again." They sat with that. Then she took a small breath that meant the world had returned and she had to return to it with it. "I should go before my manager decides I've been abducted by a VIP. Is that what I am?" He kept the question light and failed. She didn't flinch. "Tonight you're the man who made a wish with his eyes open." He nodded once, almost bowing to the sentence. "Thank you, Lena." "Happy birthday, Ethan," she said, standing, smoothing her apron like a curtain call. Inventory. One honest conversation. She left as quietly as she had arrived, and yet the room felt full. He didn't check his phone. He didn't summon anyone. He stared at the small dent their plates had made in the tablecloth and found the weight of it comforting. He stayed another 10 minutes, not delaying anything, just letting the air finish changing. When he finally stepped into the corridor that led to the main hall, the restaurant remembered who he was. The maitre d' straightened. A hostess adjusted her smile to the richer setting. Two managers, he'd hired both, spoke his name with relief and caution, the way you say the weather after a storm. He answered them with politeness and no appetite for power. He asked for the bill and signed with a pen that had paid for much larger signatures. Then, almost as an afterthought but not really, he added in his even hand, "Compliments to the staff, particularly Lena." The maitre d' blinked. "Which?" he caught himself. "Of course." Ethan lifted his coat from the attendant's arm and paused. "What time do your evening servers finish?" 10, Mr. Ward. The name was out now. We weren't expecting you this evening. Happy birthday." He nodded, not at the wish but at the truth inside it. They weren't expecting him. He stepped into the lobby and then through the glass doors into a night that had decided on a fine rain. The city hummed at a lower frequency when it rained, more honest, less performative. He tried a driver's number, then put the phone away, then took it back out just to look at the messages that still weren't there. He typed none of the things he thought. He walked toward the corner where the employee's exit would spit its tired into the street, and he did something he'd never done on his birthday. He waited. Inside, Lena carried a tray of empty martini glasses to the bar. 2 minutes, she told Marco, who believed in watches and overtime like sacraments. She washed her hands for too long, pretending the hot water could iron the trembling out of her pulse. When she returned to the service station, June, who had been working there since the restaurant was carpets and blueprints, lifted a penciled eyebrow. "You sat," June said, not asking. "I talked," Lena corrected. June lowered her voice. "To Ethan Ward." The last name arrived like a door slamming in a quiet house. Lena didn't drop anything. She met the name with the same patience she had given the candle. "I talked to Ethan," she said. "He didn't have a last name while we were talking." June's smile was a weather report that predicted understanding. "You'll want to know before someone tells you less kindly. He owns this place." Lena nodded once, filed it next to Arthur, next to Wednesdays, next to rent. She did not let her mind rewrite the conversation to make room for a fortune. The sentences they had spoken were still exactly the size they had been. At 10:05, she hung her apron in the row of tired cloth and stepped out into the rain that the city wore like a thoughtful hat. The employee's door thudded behind her. She drew in air that tasted of asphalt and basil and anniversary candles. Then she saw him. He hadn't sheltered under the awning. He was a few steps out, rain finding his hair, coat unbuttoned the way men hold their chests open when they've decided not to defend them. For a fraction she considered ducking her head and walking past. For another, she wondered if this was the part of the story where rich people make ordinary kindness expensive. Then he lifted a hand, not to stop her but to acknowledge that the world had just placed them on the same sidewalk again. "I didn't want to keep you," he said. "You didn't," she answered. "Good." He smiled like a man remembering his native language. "I wanted to thank you without a table between us. You already did. You wrote it with your signature." He looked down, embarrassed that the pen had betrayed him. "That was for the ledger. This is for the wish." They stood in a pocket of rain that didn't hurry. Traffic smeared by in gentle arguments of light. She shifted her tote higher on her shoulder. He looked at the scuffed leather like it was a biography and decided not to read it out loud. "Do you need a car?" he asked, then winced. That sounded like an offer and a test at the same time. "I take the 41, she said. "It's honest about how long it takes." He matched her grin. "Honesty seems to be your brand. It's cheaper than the other kind." "May I walk you to the stop?" he asked, simple. "Not to change your route, just to finish the conversation." She measured him for limits and found that the tape stopped at courtesy. "Okay." They walked. Rain made the city's private conversations public. Roof edges talking to gutters, gutters gossiping with drains. He adjusted his stride without making it obvious. She didn't fill silences with the applause of small talk. When they turned onto the avenue, he said, "I'm not good at today." "Birthdays?" she asked. "People," he said. "Today just made a highlight reel." She nodded like a nurse counting a pulse. "You'll get better if you practice on purpose." He let that prescription sit. "I told myself I was done with parties." "That wasn't a party," she said. "That was a rescue. You pulled yourself out before the wrong crowd could." He thought of the guest lists he hadn't made, the speeches he hadn't given, the laughter he hadn't rented. "Have you ever noticed," he said, "that the people who say they'll be there for you want you to be somewhere else first? The ones who mean it show up where you actually are," she replied. At the bus shelter, she checked the digital sign, 7 minutes. He wanted those minutes the way he used to want deals to close. "I used to." He searched for a shape that would fit. "Evaluate." "I told myself I was protecting myself. And then I looked up and realized I'd built an airport with no landings. Just departures." She studied the rain beading on the sleeve of his coat. "You don't have to interview everyone you meet to decide if they're human." "Bad habit," he said. "Habits change when the reward does," she said. "If you stop testing, you might get surprised." He angled his head. "Like tonight." "Like tonight," she echoed. The bus exhaled into view 2 blocks down, all lit rectangles and wet steel. He felt the small panic of a child whose turn at the swing just started to be fun. "Can I?" He stopped himself before the sentence collapsed into money. "Can I see you again when you're not on the clock?" She looked at him in a way that required him to be specific without instructing him to perform. He tried again. "Coffee. In daylight. Where nobody has to pretend to like either of us." Something in the world aligned with the stoplight's changing color. "Wednesday," she said. "I have laundry in the morning. Afternoon would be honest." "Afternoon, then," he said, tasting the word like a new city. The bus sighed to a halt. He took a half step back, letting her choose the geometry of goodbye. She lifted a hand, 2 fingers in a neat wave, then touched the side of the shelter like a swimmer tapping the pool's wall. "Inventory," she said as the doors opened. 2 honest conversations. "And cake," he added. "And cake," she allowed and climbed the steps. He stood on the wet pavement long after the bus had drawn a bright line down the avenue, until the rain gathered in the cuffs of his sleeves and the city returned his reflection with interest. Somewhere behind him, the restaurant closed its books for the night. Somewhere ahead of him, Wednesday unfolded like a promise that didn't need a bow. He wasn't cured of anything, but he was undeniably less alone. Wednesday came dressed in pale sunlight and restless clouds. Lena checked the clock above the laundromat dryers for the 5th time, though the load in Machine 3 had another 20 minutes. She had spent the morning folding uniforms and pinning socks together, convincing herself that it was no different from any other Wednesday. And yet the thought kept returning. Today she had promised to meet a man she had known for all of 2 conversations, one of which happened across a cake. She wore a simple blue sweater and jeans, the kind of clothes that allowed her to blend into the bus crowd. Her hair, usually tied up for work, fell loose over her shoulders. She hadn't bought anything new. She couldn't. But she had polished her shoes until the black shone against the cracked pavement. When the last dryer buzzed, she folded her laundry quickly, tucked it into a tote, and whispered a half-prayer that he wouldn't see the frayed edges of her life. Ethan arrived early. He hadn't done that in years. He was the man others waited for, the man whose time was always framed as a gift. But at the small cafe near the university campus, he found himself sitting by the window before the hour struck. No bodyguards, no entourage, no starched suit. A gray coat, a plain shirt, and the faint nervousness of someone trying to remember how to be ordinary. He held the menu like it might instruct him on conversation. When Lena pushed the glass door open, her hair damp from a drizzle that had slipped out of the clouds, he rose to greet her. Not because it was polite, but because something in him refused to let her cross the room without acknowledgement. "You came," he said, softer than intended. "You asked," she replied with a quick smile, sliding into the chair opposite. The cafe was busy with students hunched over laptops, the hiss of espresso machines, the clatter of cups. For Ethan, who was used to private rooms and hushed service, the noise was almost startlingly alive. Nobody cared who he was. Nobody looked up to see if he signed the checks. Here, he was just a man meeting a woman on a Wednesday afternoon. "I wasn't sure what you liked," he admitted, nodding at the menu. "So I thought we could risk coffee." "Risk accepted," she said, scanning the list. "As long as it's not the most expensive thing. I don't want to drink regret." That made him laugh, an unpolished sound that caught even him off guard. The waiter brought 2 cappuccinos and a slice of apple tart Lena insisted they share. She ate with the unself-conscious hunger of someone who rarely allowed herself luxuries, and Ethan found himself slowing his pace to match hers, savoring every bite as if it were communion. "Tell me about you," she said finally, brushing crumbs from her sweater. He hesitated, the reflex of years pressing on his throat. Usually introductions came with resumes, with measured lists designed to impress or intimidate. But her eyes asked for something else. "I grew up in a town no one visits," he began. "My father left early. My mother worked until she couldn't. I learned to build things because it was the only way to keep the roof from leaking." He paused, searching her face for judgment. There was none. "I built businesses the same way. One board at a time, one risk at a time. And then one day I looked around and realized the roof was solid, but the house was empty." Lena stirred her coffee slowly, letting silence settle before answering. "Houses need people more than walls. I know, ours cracked every winter. But we stayed warm because my dad made jokes while we shivered." Her words wrapped around him like a memory he'd lost. "You talk about him a lot," Ethan said. "Because he was the proof that kindness works," she answered. Her smile faltered for a breath. "Cancer doesn't care how kind you are, but it taught me that moments matter. Even the ones you think nobody will remember." Ethan's chest tightened. He wanted to reach across the table, to press his hand over hers, but he didn't. Instead, he said quietly, "You gave me one of those moments the other night." Color rose in her cheeks. "All I said was you didn't look alone. And I haven't felt the same since," he admitted, the words tumbling before he could measure them. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The cafe buzzed on. Students laughed at screens. Spoons chimed against porcelain. But at their table, the world narrowed to 2 people who had nothing and everything to confess. Lena cleared her throat. "Why did you wait for me outside? You could have sent someone. Or not bothered at all." "Because I didn't want the night to end at the table," he said honestly. And because I knew if I let you walk away without trying, I'd regret it more than any deal I've lost. The vulnerability in his tone startled her. She wasn't used to men like him, at least not ones who admitted to regret. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Then don't waste this one. No interviews, no tests, just talk. And so they did. About books they hadn't finished, about cities they had left behind, about the absurd price of laundry detergent. She teased him when he confessed he'd never taken a bus in 20 years. He teased her when she admitted she once tried to bake a cake with salt instead of sugar. The hours folded into each other like clean sheets stacked high. When they finally stepped out into the cool evening, the city lights flickering awake, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in years. Anticipation. Not for the next meeting, not for the next contract, but for the next Wednesday, or the next accidental moment when she might look at him and remind him he wasn't invisible. At the bus stop, she adjusted her tote and said, "Inventory, 3 conversations now. And coffee," he added. "And coffee," she echoed, her smile breaking wide. The bus approached, brakes hissing, and Ethan knew he would watch it carry her away. But for the first time, he didn't feel abandoned. He felt chosen. The following week unfolded with the rhythm of waiting. Ethan discovered that anticipation could be its own form of wealth. Meetings with board members and lawyers blurred into background noise. What he remembered clearly was the shape of Lena's smile when she had said no tests, just talk. It had echoed in his mind with the persistence of a promise. So on Friday evening, when most of the city prepared for dinner reservations, he walked again toward the cafe by the university. He hadn't asked her to meet. He wanted the surprise to be on him this time. She was there, bent over a textbook, a pen twisting in her fingers, hair falling like a curtain over her cheek. He stood in the doorway for a long second, marveling that he had learned to stop entering rooms with fanfare. "Studying or plotting world domination?" he asked when he slid into the seat across from her. She looked up, startled, then laughed. "Both. Depends on the exam." She closed the book reluctantly. "You didn't warn me. I wanted to see what you look like when you're not expecting me." "And human," he said simply. "That's rarer than it should be." Her cheeks warmed. "Coffee, then?" "Always," he said. The conversation that night stretched longer than the hours deserved. They wandered from small things, her professor's stubborn habit of assigning double readings, his inability to cook anything more complicated than toast, to larger ones, like what they feared losing and what they hoped to keep. She told him about the way hospitals smelled both of bleach and of courage. He told her about the silence of empty houses. At one point, as the cafe dimmed its lights for closing, he said, "Do you know why I sit with you, Lena?" She arched an eyebrow. "Because I'm the only one who doesn't send you invoices?" He smiled, but there was a shadow in it. "Because you didn't know who I was. You didn't treat me differently. Most people, they want something, so I test them. I give them chances to show what matters." The sentence left his mouth before he could catch it. Lena's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You test them? It sounds colder than it is," he rushed. "I just look when you have what I have. Everyone claims to be sincere, so I watch how they act when they think it doesn't matter. That way I know who's real." She pulled her hand back from the table, as though the candlelight between them had suddenly chilled. "So what was I? Another test?" His breath caught. "No, you were different. But you just said." Her voice rose, then softened again, like she was afraid of disturbing the other late-night guests. "Ethan, you waited for me outside the restaurant. You came here. You made me think this was real. And now you tell me it's an experiment." He reached for her wrist but stopped short of touching. "Lena, please. I didn't mean it like that. You were never supposed to be. She shook her head. You don't see it, do you? You sit in your world where everything is a transaction. Even kindness. Even me. You don't ask for honesty. You measure it like a balance sheet. The words stung because they were true. He sat back, silenced by the sharpness of her disappointment. She stood, pulling her coat tight around her. You know why I said you didn't look alone that night? Because I thought maybe you just needed someone to see you. Not judge, not weigh, not test. Just see. And now I wonder if you even saw me at all. Lena. No, she said firmly, though her voice trembled. I won't be a box you tick on a list. I have exams to pass, rent to pay, a life to live. I don't have time to prove I'm not like everyone else. The cafe's bell chimed as she pushed the door open. Cold air rushed in, scattering napkins across the empty tables. Ethan remained seated, staring at the untouched coffee cooling in front of him, the echo of her words louder than any boardroom argument he had ever lost. For the first time in years, he felt stripped of his defenses, not by an enemy, but by the only person whose opinion mattered. The man who had mastered empires realized he had failed the simplest task: to let someone believe he was human without demanding evidence. Outside, Lena walked quickly toward the bus stop, fighting the sting in her eyes. She hated herself for caring this much after so few meetings. She hated that his words hurt because somewhere deep down, she had hoped. But most of all, she hated the idea that maybe he would never understand what it meant to be trusted without conditions. Ethan pressed his palms against the table, then dragged himself to his feet. The staff whispered behind the counter, recognizing him now, but he didn't care. For once, his name felt like a chain. He stepped into the night air, the city buzzing around him, and realized he had no idea how to fix what had cracked between them. He only knew one thing: losing her was not an option. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He paced the long marble hall of his penthouse like a man trapped inside his own success. The city spread beneath his windows, glittering with the very lights that once made him proud, but now every reflection felt like an accusation. Lena's words rang again and again. You measure kindness like a balance sheet. By morning, his assistant had already left 3 voicemails about a merger meeting. He ignored them all. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't care about the numbers. The only calculation he wanted to solve was how to reach the girl who had looked at him as though he were human. 2 days passed before he saw her again. He found out where she studied. Nursing school wasn't difficult to track when you owned half the city's hospitals, though he forced himself to walk the narrow line between resources and intrusion. He chose not to send anyone, not to arrange an official meeting. Instead, he went alone, coat collar turned up, sitting quietly in the back of a lecture hall until the session ended. Lena didn't see him at first. She was gathering her notes, shoulders bent under the weight of exhaustion. When she finally looked up, her expression froze. She walked faster toward the door, but he stepped into her path. Don't, she said sharply, keeping her voice low so the other students wouldn't hear. This is my life, not a stage for your apologies. I'm not here to stage anything, he said. I came to listen. To you. To whatever you'd let me hear. Her eyes narrowed, suspicious. Why? Because the other night I ruined something that mattered, and I can't fix it with money. I can only fix it by showing up. The sincerity in his tone held her still for a moment. Then she shook her head. You can't just appear and expect me to forget what you said. I don't want you to forget, he admitted. I want you to know that I heard you. She tried to step around him, but he followed her down the corridor. Please, Lena. 1 coffee. Not at a fancy cafe. Anywhere you choose. I'll sit and listen. She stopped abruptly, turning to face him. You don't get it, do you? I don't want to be another item on your list of who's genuine. I don't want to live under your microscope. I know, he said, his voice almost breaking. And that's why I need you to see me outside of all of that. For a long second, she studied him. His hair was damp from the drizzle outside. His shoes scuffed from walking more than usual. There was no chauffeur waiting at the curb, no immaculate suit. He looked like a man stripped of every armor except his eyes. Fine, she muttered at last. 15 minutes. There's a soup stand around the corner. If you can handle plastic spoons, you can talk. The corner stand smelled of broth and pepper, the kind of place Lena often ate when her shift ran too late for dinner. Ethan ordered clumsily, almost dropping the tray when the vendor barked his change. He hadn't used small bills in years. Lena hid a smile behind her cup of soup. They sat on a bench under the awning, steam rising into the cold evening. Around them, students laughed, couples shared bread. An old man argued with the vendor about extra onions. For once, Ethan wasn't the center of the room. He was just another man holding a flimsy spoon. I never wanted to test you, he said quietly, stirring without eating. That word slipped out because it's all I've done for years. But you, Lena, you aren't part of some experiment. You were the first person in a long time who made me feel visible. She looked at him over her cup. Do you know how many people say things like that when they want forgiveness? I don't want forgiveness, he said. I want a chance to live differently. And I think you might be the only one who can teach me how. Her heart wavered, but she fought it. You think I have time to teach a millionaire how to be decent? I'm barely keeping my own life together. He finally tasted the soup, wincing as the heat burned his tongue. Then maybe we can practice together. You, me, cheap soup and no tests. That made her laugh despite herself. She shook her head. You're impossible. But not hopeless? He asked. She sighed, lowering her cup. You have a lot to learn, Ethan Ward. He set his spoon down. Then let me start with this. I'll come back here every week at this same bench, soup or no soup. If you want to talk, I'll be here. If you don't, I'll still be here. Not because I'm testing you, because I don't want to let the only honest thing in my life slip away. The rain thickened, drumming against the awning. Lena watched him for a long time, searching for the performance. But there was none. Just a man with wet hair, wrinkled coat, and eyes that carried no calculation, only need. She stood, adjusting her tote. We'll see, she said softly. Actions speak louder than words, Ethan. Don't forget that. And with that, she walked away, leaving him on the bench with a cooling cup of soup and a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, he had managed to keep the flame alive. The next Wednesday came with icy wind that swept through the streets like invisible hands. Lena wrapped her scarf tighter as she left class, certain Ethan wouldn't be there. He had promised, yes, but she had heard promises before. From men who walked away, from friends who vanished when life became inconvenient. Words were cheap, and yet, when she turned the corner toward the soup stand, there he was, sitting on the same bench, a paper cup steaming between his palms, hair tousled by the cold. He looked up as if he had been waiting not minutes but days. You came, she said, surprised despite herself. I said I would, he answered simply. This time they ate in silence, listening to the city breathe around them. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was steady, grounding, the kind of silence that carried more truth than chatter. Over the next weeks, the ritual repeated. Sometimes she spoke, sometimes she didn't. Sometimes he asked questions, sometimes he just listened. Slowly, without her noticing, the sharp edges between them softened. He never once mentioned his wealth. He never once tried to impress. He was simply Ethan, a man learning to exist outside the glittering cage he had built. But one evening, as February bled into March, the fragile peace cracked. Lena came to the bench late, cheeks flushed from rushing. "You're early," she said, breathless. "I wanted to tell you something," Ethan said. "I turned down a gala tonight, an entire ballroom full of people who expect me to show up. I told them I had better company." Lena froze. "Ethan, that's not." "Not what?" he asked, leaning forward. "Not what people like me do. That's the point. I don't want to be the man who fills empty rooms with noise. I'd rather sit here in the cold with you than toast champagne with 1,000 strangers." She swallowed hard, torn between the warmth in his words and the fear of what they meant. "Don't make me responsible for your rebellion. I'm not your cure." He reached across, not to touch her, but to anchor himself. "You're not my cure. You're my reminder that I can still wish for something real." The words unsettled her, because deep down she wanted to believe them. But believing meant risk, and risk meant heartbreak. She pulled back. I can't be another experiment, Ethan." Something in his expression shifted then, a decision solidifying. He stood, buttoned his coat, and said only, "Then let me prove it." 2 nights later, Lena finished her shift at the restaurant and stepped into the freezing dark. She was halfway down the block when she saw him. Not in his car, not flanked by guards, but standing beside a city bus. In his hands he held 2 tickets. "Number 41, he said, smiling awkwardly. "Thought I'd try honesty in public transit." She blinked. "You took the bus?" "Terrifying at first," he admitted. "But people looked at me like I was just another passenger. Do you know how rare that is for me?" Against her will, she laughed. "And how did it go?" "I missed my stop twice," he confessed. "But I learned something. When you're not pretending, strangers are kinder than you expect." Her laughter faded into something gentler. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," he said firmly. "I did. Because you told me actions matter more than words." He held out one of the tickets. She hesitated, then took it. Together they boarded, sitting side by side on a cracked vinyl seat as the bus rumbled into the night. The city outside blurred into streaks of neon and rain. "Where are we going?" she asked. "You'll see," he said. The bus carried them across districts until Ethan finally pulled the cord. They stepped off into a quiet neighborhood where street lamps hummed. At the corner stood a small community clinic, its lights glowing warm against the dark. Lena frowned. "Why here?" "Because I wanted you to know what I do when I'm not being photographed," Ethan said softly. "This clinic, I funded it anonymously years ago. No one knows. I didn't even put my name on the plaque. But tonight I wanted you to see. Not to impress you, but because you deserve the truth." Her chest tightened. She walked slowly to the door, reading the sign about free services for low-income families. Inside, she glimpsed nurses helping patients, children clutching toys in the waiting room. "You did this?" she whispered. "I wanted to build something that mattered," he said. "But it never felt enough until now. Because what's the point of building walls if no one stands beside you inside them?" Tears stung her eyes, uninvited. She turned toward him. "Why show me this?" "Because you told me not to test you," Ethan said. "So I'm not. I'm showing you who I am, even the parts one hide. If you walk away, at least you'll know me for real." For a moment she couldn't speak. The cold air wrapped around them, the street silent except for the hum of a passing car. She saw him not as a millionaire, not as a test, but as a man stripped of everything but sincerity. She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "You know what I wished for the night I first saw you with that candle?" "What?" "That you wouldn't look alone anymore." He exhaled shakily, as if her words had set him free. They stood there, the glow of the clinic behind them, the night holding its breath. Then, quietly, she reached for his hand. His fingers closed around hers with a reverence he hadn't felt since childhood. "Inventory?" she whispered, smiling through tears. "One real wish come true." He smiled back, eyes glistening. "And one reason to believe again."